If you have a look at your database folder, at this point you're familiar with the migrations directory and the seeders directory. But there's also one for factories. And again, we get one out of the box for a user factory. Notice the user definition. And then for each attribute, we populate it with some kind of fake data to satisfy that column. And notice we referenced this library called Faker. So if we want a name, we can tell Faker, just give us a name. If we need an email, we can tell Faker, give us a unique, safe email. We don't care what it is. We're not going to use it. It's just a fake email address to satisfy the requirements for that column. Now, if we scroll up, notice that a user factory has a corresponding model called user. And then if we click through to the user model, you'll also see that any new Eloquent model you create uses this trait called has factory. And you'll find that here. Now, you don't need to know really what's going on here, but do note that it gives you access to a factory method. This allows you to do exactly what we talked about in the last episode. It allows you to call a factory method to quickly create and persist a new user in the database. And the attributes will be declared and referenced here. So now, if I bring up Tinker, I can say app models user factory create. And notice each time I do it, I'm going to get different fake data. It's entirely random. And that's exactly what we want here. I can even do things like this. Give me 50 random users. And just like that, you now have 50 more records in the database. So cool. But yeah, notice right now, if I try to say, well, give me a factory for a post, let's just see what happens. It's not going to work though. There is no post factory found. Okay. Well, we do see first, if we go into the app directory in your models, again, out of the box, when you create a new Eloquent model, it will automatically use this factory trait, which means any new Eloquent model, again, will have access to a method named factory. But yeah, again, when you do that, by convention, it's going to look for a post factory. And we don't have one at this point. PHP Artisan make factory post factory. And now, again, you'll find that in your database factories directory. Or again, when you make a model, well, you learned many episodes ago that you can also include a migration as part of that model, but you could also create a seeder file, you could create a controller, and you can create a factory. Or you can create all of those things at once. But maybe what you'll find in the future is, let's say you're making a model for, I don't know, a comment. Well, as part of that, you could say, well, I'm going to need a migration for that. I'm going to need a factory for that. And maybe you need a custom seeder class, but I don't think so. So if we ran that, notice with a single command, you now have a comment Eloquent model, a corresponding factory, and a corresponding migration. Pretty neat. And you can again find those here. There's your comment. There's your model. And then of course in the migrations directory, there is your migration. Okay, but in this case, we don't quite need those yet. We might work on that in a couple episodes. So I will delete those entirely. Anyhow, let's work on our post factory. What is some fake data that would satisfy a post? Well, we know. Here's our structure. Now, we don't have to populate all of these because many of them will have default values. But we will need a corresponding user, a category, a slug, a title, an excerpt, a body. Okay, let's do the easy ones. Title, and we can say this, Faker, and notice all of these methods available to you. Pretty much anything you'd want. And if you don't know what property or method you're looking for, just guess. So maybe you want a sentence or a title or a heading. In this case, a sentence will do. Okay? An excerpt, maybe that could also be a sentence. Remember, you don't care what it says. It's generic. It doesn't matter. The body, maybe this is more than a sentence. Maybe it's a paragraph. So those are the easy ones. But what about user ID? This can't be some random number. It actually needs to point to an existing user. But what if we said user factory like this? We already know that a user has a corresponding factory. So if we write it like this, Laravel will automatically create the user, grab the ID, and then assign it right here. Let's see if we can do the same thing for the category ID. So what this effectively means is when I create a post, it will also create a user in the database, and it will also create a category in the database all at once. Okay, I'm excited. So let's do this. Let's reset our database. Now it's entirely empty. Next, I will say app models post and find the post factory and persist. But it fails. Yeah, this makes sense. So we tried to reference a category factory, but one doesn't exist yet. That's our next step. PHP Artisan make factory category factory. And I'll do this one really quickly. Category factory, right down here. I think all we need is a name. And we'll make that a word and then a slug. This, faker, and I think they have a slug. Yeah. Okay, let's try it one more time. But it fails again. Field slug doesn't have a default value. Did we forget that? Post factory. Yes, we did. I bet you saw that. Slug, and we'll add one here as well. Okay, sorry about that. Let's try it one last time. Cross our fingers, and this time it works. Okay, so again, notice it's a little bit of work. It takes a few seconds to declare your attributes and the corresponding fake data. But once you do, for the lifetime of this site now, whenever I quickly need to whip up a post, whether for manually testing in the browser or seeding my database, or even when preparing a series of unit tests or model tests, I now have a laughably simple and quick way to do so. So if I come back to Table Plus, have a look. We now have a post with a corresponding category and a corresponding user. And further, we know, let's grab that post, app models post first. We've already set up relationships for the post. So I could also say post with the user who wrote it. There you go. Maybe also with the category. Okay, so now we have a post record. We can grab the user relationship and we can grab the category. And that's the gist of it. It's really not that difficult. So now we can finally return to our database seeder and change this up a little bit to make it cleaner. First, I'm going to select all of this and clear it out. And I could now, well, if I wanted to, I could say post factory create, and that alone, again, will create a corresponding category and a user. So if I were to close this out and run db seed, if I come back to Firefox now, you have a generic post and a generic category written by a generic user. Pretty fun. So now if I switch back, if you want, you can get rid of all of this entirely. And in fact, in terms of truncating, you would only need this if you don't refresh your database at the start. But otherwise, you could remove that entirely, reformat, with the assumption that you only run your seeders when you refresh your database. So notice if I run PHP Artisan migrate fresh seed, it's already dropping those tables, so there would be no need to truncate them a second time. Okay, so we can replace this with, how many posts do we want? Why don't we start with 5 posts? We run migrate fresh, and then I just have one more thing to show you. But real quick, you now have 5 posts by 5 users, associated with 5 different categories. But what about the cases where you want to whip up data that's associated with an already existing model? Well, you could do something like this. You could start by saying, okay, well, let's create a user, but instead of using all fake data, I do want to merge in a specific name. So for example, if I did John Doe, well, now notice, let's clear that out. If I did that alone, you'll see we have fake data for everything except what I merged in for the name. So that allows you to say, well, given I have a new user or a new post, and you can use fake data for everything except the title or except the user or the category. Now you have a way to do so. So you could then say, okay, well, this is going to be my main user. Let's now create 5 posts, but instead of the post factory creating a brand new user to associate with, I'm instead going to override that user ID, like so. Associate that post with the user that I've already created. So this is an option as well. If I now run migrate fresh, you'll see this time, yes, you still have 5 posts, but all of them were written by the same user. And you can view those here. Here's that category. Everything works the way you'd expect.